Well, I'm continuing from where I started yesterday in the corridors of power. And I will focus a bit more on the book of Daniel as we look at Daniel in the corridors of power. We're going to talk about how to gain access to the corridors of power and how to manage your own space in the corridors of power. Access to the corridors of power is controlled. There is access control to the corridors of power. You can't just walk into the corridors of power. There are passwords, there are codes that give you access to power. There are gatekeepers and there are power brokers. And you need to know how to negotiate every step of your way as you move into that space. We're going to start with our reading from the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 1, and I will do from verse number 1 to verse number 4. This series I'm doing is a 6-part series, Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, we're supposed to stand. Thank you for the honor you give to God's word. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Amen. You may sit, I suppose. Is that the right thing to do? Okay. This is how we're introduced to the book of Daniel, and as yet, in what we read, the name of Daniel has not been mentioned, but we read a lot about him in the book of Daniel. Daniel was a citizen of a conquered people. His nation had been defeated in war. He was a spoil of war. He had moved from his nation into a new nation, a new kingdom, the kingdom of Babylon. The scripture we read says that his God gave Judah into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. In the olden days, wars were not just wars between kings, but between gods. And so when you lost a battle, it would mean that your God had been defeated. And so the tools for worship in your temple would be ransacked from the house of your God and made subservient to the house of the God of the conquering nation. And so this is what had happened to Judah. Spiritually and psychologically, anybody who was part of Judah would see themselves as a defeated people. The world's major superpower had conquered them. The God they trusted in supposedly had failed them, and the foreign God now reigned over them. And when they go into Babylon, they carry the people of Judah captive. In Babylon, Daniel's life is profoundly influenced. Daniel goes into captivity at around the age of between 15 and 17. He was just a teenager. He lived for over 70 years in Babylon and served under 4 different kings in 2 different kingdoms. He lived his life more in Babylon than in Judah, but his faith was in Judah. In Babylon, Daniel's life was profoundly impacted by 2 important people. And these 2 important people represent important gatekeepers in the corridors of power. The first person was Nebuchadnezzar, the king who had conquered his people. Nebuchadnezzar is the monarch. Nebuchadnezzar has a big vision, and he's in the process of expanding territories and conquering nations and taking them over. In the process of doing that, Nebuchadnezzar takes the best of those nations to deploy in his vision. So Nebuchadnezzar is a world leader with a big vision, recruiting talent. And he's building his territories. And he comes to the nation of Daniel and conquers them. When you read the passage, it's very interesting how the Bible describes the process. It says that God gave Judah into the hand of Jehoiakim. How would a righteous God give a nation he was in covenant with to a nation that didn't worship him? It was because his kingdom people had turned away from his process. And it tells you that sometimes the people we may consider as non-believers may be on a divine agenda. So Nebuchadnezzar becomes king, and God's hand, Nebuchadnezzar conquers Judah, and God's hand is in it. So he is a very important person, the monarch. The second person who is going to profoundly influence the life of Daniel in Babylon is a man called Ashpenaz. Ashpenaz was a eunuch, and he is a mentor and a talent scout. He has access to the corridors of power, and he has access to Nebuchadnezzar and can connect talent to Nebuchadnezzar. Ashpenaz's job is to identify talent, to groom talent, and open doors to the talent. And so if you found favor with Ashpenaz, you could end up serving in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. So he is a major player in this process. There are people who are talented but never get to stand in any position of power and influence. They're talented, but their talents don't take them anywhere. Do you think the most popular singers in the world today have the best voice and have the best talent? Do you think the greatest footballers playing in the English Premier Team or the Serie A or some other league outside in Europe are the greatest players in the world? No. The people at the top are not necessarily the most talented. The people at the top are the ones who met an Ashpenaz who connected them to a Nebuchadnezzar. Talent is great, but talent without a talent scout and a monarch who has a big vision to deploy your talent will keep you talented but playing at a very low level. In the corridors of power, God will place before you an Ashpenaz, a talent scout, and a Nebuchadnezzar, a monarch, a person with a big global vision who can suck you into a system bigger than yourself. There are people who are great footballers in the streets of Lagos who would never become great. Sometimes you go out to some of your neighborhoods and watch people playing soccer and see the dexterity with which they play, but they will never amount to anything. There are great musicians who amount to nothing. There are great scientists who amount to nothing. There are people with great talent who would never make it in life. I know we believe that we can all make it no matter where we are. But if you are a David watching over shepherds, you need a Samuel to shift you. Until you find a Samuel, you're going to watch over sheep, kill all the lions in the territory, kill all the bears, and still stay a village boy. But you need somebody who comes into your life. So Ashpenaz is going to play a very important role in the destiny of Daniel. He is part of a conquered people, but he is a man of destiny. And so Ashpenaz has an assignment from Nebuchadnezzar. He says, I want to engage a people. I want to bring them into the corridors of power. And there are three broad qualifications that he's looking for. First, he's looking for people with the right physical form. People who are youthful and strong and without blemish. The system of Babylon placed a lot of value on physical form. You had to be athletic, you had to be strong, you had to be well poised. And when they said without blemish, they meant that without any kind of physical limitation. Now, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, they could not envisage that a person with physical challenges could amount to any physical achievement. I suppose if they see the current Paralympics, they'll be very surprised that people with limitations can do so much. But in their day, if you had physical limitations, there was no system to help you to amount to much. So they're looking for people who were perfectly formed, physical appearance. And they were looking for people who were good looking, not ugly people. The way the people looked, the way the people presented themselves was going to be important. The way you look and the way you present yourself is one of the important things we look out for when you are accessing the corridors of power. I have sat on several interview panels and I've seen people fail, not because they didn't have information, but their hair was not well combed. Or they entered the interview room with a presence, not of the Holy Spirit. And immediately they entered the interview room, everybody sensed them. And we all start writing, no way for him. I remember one particular interview panel I was on about 25 years ago, and this guy came in very well versed in the subject matter we were interviewing him on. But when he came into the interview room, he sat on the seat and slouched. And when we were doing a review, everybody noted it. Look at the way he sat. And everybody put their interpretation on it. Maybe he had a bad day, maybe he had a bad back, but it failed him. It may not seem fair to you, but that's how Babylon operates. And if you're going to go into the corridors of power, you don't change the rules to suit yourself. You work with the rules as they are. Your physical appearance is very important. Physical appearance. So that's the first thing. It says they want young people with no blemish, good looking. They wanted people with social grace. Social grace. In the days of Daniel, leadership was hereditary from king to king's sons, from royals to their children. People didn't change their class much. And so they wanted the sons of rulers and the sons of the nobles. People who had social graces, know how to sit at table and eat with the right cutlery. People who know how to present themselves. People who know how to talk well. That's what the Babylonian system is looking for. When you go for big negotiations, sometimes people watch the way you eat. And if the food goes into your mouth and you're still talking, food in your mouth, it may not mean much, but people will assume that if you can't take care of the food in your mouth, how can you take care of their money in your account? So people make all kinds of judgments based on social graces. So they wanted physical appearance, social graces. Third, mental aptitude. Mental aptitude. They wanted people who were talented, gifted in all wisdom, people who were informed, that is, people possessing knowledge, people who were clever, quick to understand, and people who were cultured, ability to serve in the king's palace. Mental aptitude. They didn't want people that they have to teach the same lesson to 10 times over. They wanted people who can catch on to information very quickly. So Nebuchadnezzar says to Ashpenaz, look among the Hebrews. They are all slaves. But I want you to look at people who have the physical outlook, social graces, mental aptitude, and select them. The rest of them are going to slave quarters. They're going to work with their muscles. They're going to crack rocks. They're going to build for me. But these ones I want to use for my vision. So Ashpenaz goes through the process. And I'm not sure how he eliminated, but he selects people based on these categories. And then takes them through training. The school that Daniel attended was a 3-year training program. 3-year training program. Almost to a bachelor's degree. The training components were basically 2. 1, to teach them the language, and number 2, to teach them the literature. Language, people who master communication like Pastor Paul, who can speak eloquently, who can carry ideas with words, because our world is shaped by words. Words are very powerful. People would sometimes say words are cheap. Whoever said that hasn't listened to people with words. Martin Luther King spoke words and inspired a whole generation of people with a dream which he had. But it was language in communication. Winston Churchill was able to mobilize the English army to fight against Nazi Blitzkrieg, and when Hitler and his army were trying to take over Great Britain, he just mobilized them with words that they would fight and never surrender. Words are very powerful. When there is going to be a battle, there are words. When a team is going to play, the coaches speak words to the players. Apart from all the training, they inspire them with words. Generals inspire their troops with words. Who tells you that words are not important? If you don't know how to communicate clearly, your ideas will never be transmitted beyond yourself. You should have the ability to tell people what you think, what you feel, and how you want them to respond to you. So they're going to teach them mastery of language. If you're going to be in the corridors of power, you have to be able to clearly communicate your ideas. You may not have all the vocabulary in the dictionary, but you should be able to tell people exactly as you think and feel. And they wanted them to master the literature of the Chaldeans, mastery of philosophy and ideas. So they go through this training. They're supposed to go through this training. Verse 5 of Daniel chapter 1 says, and the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of the time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, to Azariah Abednego. Right there, Nebuchadnezzar establishes his agenda. His agenda is to transform Daniel from a Jew believing in God to a Babylonian believing in the gods of Babylon. And he starts the process by changing their names. So he says, Daniel, you'll no longer be called Daniel, meaning God is my judge. You'll be called Belteshazzar, named after one of the gods of Babylon. Now, Daniel at that time could say, well, if you're going to change my name, then I'm going back to Judah. In the first place, you can't go back to Judah. And if you don't accept this system, you'll be taken from the palace and you go to slave quarters. It's a choice you have to make. You can function nicely in the slave quarters, or you can decide to function in the palace of the king. But he says, if you're going to play in this game, we're going to change your name. You'll be called Belteshazzar. It's a deal breaker. We can't go back. You have to change your name. Call Belteshazzar. And Daniel says, okay, if you want to call me Belteshazzar, go ahead and call me Belteshazzar. If you want to call Shadrach another name, Hananiah another name, call him another name. Call me any name you want. Because when you want to enter the corridors of power, you don't start making the rules yourself. You can only change the rules when you are the ruler. The strategy for every believer when you are entering the world system, you don't go at the onset to say, I'm changing the rules. You go in and get the power to be a ruler, to change the rules to favor your God and his kingdom, which is what Daniel eventually managed to do. So he said, well, if you want to change my name, yes, it's a pagan name. It's a name that is not really convenient for me, but that's fine. I'll go by Belteshazzar. But if you read through the whole book of Daniel, Daniel never called himself Belteshazzar. He called himself Daniel. He's like, a lot of Africans who work in America, people sometimes who go in illegally, in Nigeria, they have a Nigerian name, and then you go to Washington, D.C., and they're called Michael Roberts. And so, who is Michael Roberts? Well, that's your friend, and everybody knows him by the Ghanaian or Nigerian name. But you want to call me Michael Roberts? Go ahead, call me Michael Roberts to get my green card. But I know who I am. So Daniel says, if you want to call me Belteshazzar, go ahead and call me Belteshazzar. But I, Daniel, know who I am. And throughout the book of Daniel, he describes himself as Daniel, never Belteshazzar, because he knew his identity. But if it was what he was going to do to get into the door, he was ready to play ball. But there was something he wasn't ready to do. So you have to know what you agree to and what you disagree to. The king says, well, I'm going to make you eat my food, the portion of my food, every day. Now, Daniel had to make a decision. I have accepted the name. Can I accept the food? Because there was something deeper than just the food. You remember, if you read much of the Old Testament, there is a lot of dietary laws in the Old Testament. In other words, being a Jew involved eating. It wasn't just about going to the temple. You had to eat the right thing. So, if Daniel decided that he was going to eat the food of the Babylonians, not that the food had just been offered to idols, but much of the food of the Babylonians were the food that Jews were not supposed to eat. If he accepted that, essentially he was disconnecting himself from the covenant of God. So that was a very tricky one. Now, I've accepted to take the name. How do I handle the food matter? The name doesn't bother me much, but the food can really disturb my relationship with God. So the Bible says in verse 8 of the book of Daniel, that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. But verse 9 is very important. Now, God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of eunuchs. So Daniel is about to alter the rules. But the Bible tells us the basis on which he altered the rules. The basis is that he had been brought into favor. Now, how was he brought into favor? Well, we know favor as supernatural. But I like to think that Daniel, from the time he was recruited to the time he went to make this request, had started to work his way into the favor of the chief of eunuchs. So I'm sure when the chief of eunuchs needed water, he would serve him water. He'll go to the chief of eunuchs and ask, sir, is there any way I can serve you? Is there any way I can help you? Is there something you want me to do? He did something to be noticed amongst the people and to be noticed favorably, so that when he went to make a request, he had access to make a request. He's about to change important rules. As a matter of fact, the chief of eunuchs says, if I change this rule, I may end up dead. But I'm ready to work with you because you have shown yourself a credible person I can negotiate with. Don't make demands in the corridors of power until you have invested in building favor. Without favor, you go and make requests on emptiness. So the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food, for why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. In other words, my head would go off. So Daniel had built a strategic alliance with the chief of eunuchs. He now has to renegotiate the variation of the rules. And he says to the chief of eunuchs, in essence, all right, just give me a few days, 10 days. I'm going to eat my own diet. And after 10 days, examine me and the rest of the gang. And if you think that I am still performing at optimum, then allow me to work by my rules. In other words, if you start asking for concessions, you don't ask for concessions to be underproductive. So for example, if you are a Christian, you say, well, I want to be able to have morning devotion for 10 minutes in the office. That 10-minute morning devotion should end up making you the most productive worker in the office. That is the only way that you can work your concessions. But if your morning devotion makes you lazy, non-productive, non-communicative, your contribution is zero, then who wants you to have morning devotion in the office? So Daniel says, I want to work the rules, but test me afterwards. So he eats vegetables for 10 days. After 10 days, he's examined and he's looking good. So the chief of eunuchs now has confidence and he says, go ahead, eat what you want to eat. Daniel has managed to negotiate space in a very tight corner in a foreign land, in a very, very adverse environment. Yet he was able to negotiate for his space. He knew what to negotiate for, what to vary, and what to accept. And he goes into this place and works with the chief of eunuchs for the next 3 years. The question is, in those 3 years, were there times when his faith was challenged? Yes. Did he go to the temple of the king of Babylon? Yes. Was he supposed to sometimes stand there when sacrifices were being made? Yes. Because he didn't control Babylon. He had to be there. Now, one of the big challenges for Christians is, how do I function in a world that is so anti-Christ? I will give you the example of Naaman. In the book of 2 Kings chapter 5, there's a story of Naaman, and I will just narrate it. He had leprosy. He went to Elisha. He got healed in the Jordan. And Naaman got converted. When Naaman was going back to Syria, he makes a very, very unusual request from Elisha. He says, well, I want to have you to give me 2 mules full of earth. In other words, packaged earth, soil, from Samaria for me to take along to Syria. Now, why is he asking for earth, soil? Because he tells Elisha why he's looking for earth. He says, I am the bodyguard of the king of Syria. The king of Syria goes to worship his gods, and I must be there. I'm his aide-de-camp. I must be there. When he bows, I must bow. And I have to do that. But I know that the true God is the God of Elisha in Samaria. So when I go in with the king of Syria before his gods, I'm going to take a piece of the earth from Samaria, and I will sprinkle it under my feet, so that outwardly it may appear as if I'm bowing to the king, the gods of Syria, but inwardly I know I'm bowing to the God of Elisha from Samaria. So Naaman understood that in the corridors of power there are some things you cannot negotiate fully. You have to learn to maintain your faith in the most unlikely places. And he said, my way to do that is to be able to worship in my heart, although my body is going through the motions. Because if we don't understand how to negotiate in these spaces, there will be some places Christians will never get to. Christians will never get into chieftaincy, chiefdom in our continent. Because we say, well, it's demon possessed and they worship idols. But who is going to change it? How is it going to change? How is there going to be, how can we take the kingdoms of this nation, of this world, and make it the kingdoms of our God? There are Christians who must brave it into dangerous spaces and be able to function like Naaman. They seem to be bowing on the outside, but inwardly they are reverencing Jehovah. And they are looking for the opportunity to seize control and change the rules in their favor. Until Christians can enter into the corridors of power, there are certain places we would never go to. For Daniel, that's what he had to deal with. And for 3 years, his faith was daily challenged, daily conflicted. He's being taught information he knows to be false. They're teaching him that the gods of Babylon are greater than the God of Judah. Well, he conquered Judah, so it seemed to be logical. He has to learn all the facts. Does he believe it? No. Because there's a big difference between knowledge and belief. Just because I learned something from a professor does not mean I believe it, but I have to learn it to enter his world and seize control of his word, and later change the rules to favor my God and his cause. But if I'm going to say, well, I don't like what they are teaching, it's against my faith, well, you can decide not to learn it, but you'll be in slave quarters. Daniel was in the house of the king of Babylon. Believe you me, friends, operating in the corridors of power is not that simple. It's not black and white. Because Christians are always dealing with black and white. Is it sin? It's not sin. It's right. It's not. This is for God. It's not against God. You see, black and white is easy to define. Gray and ash is very difficult to separate. Sometimes the issues of life are not black and white. They are gray and light gray. But we have to make a choice. We have to make a decision as Christians. We have to be able to think through the processes and be able to properly negotiate our space. Otherwise, some places will be denied Christians permanently. Christians in the military, Christians going to war, Christians working as spies. Should a Christian be a spy? Tongue talking, born again, spirit filled, spying. Can the Christians be in that world? Well, it is part of the power system. Well, God sent spies. Or you think they were anointed spies? They were spies. Sent 12 spies. Joshua sent spies. Israel sent spies. It's how kingdoms work. It's how the power systems of this world work. And we need Christians in every industry, in every space that the world system operates in. And we need Christians who can act like Daniel and negotiate their space. You know, many times when we talk about Esther in the Bible, you know, these days we've romanticized Esther so much. You know, now Esther, you know, the whole Esther and the king thing is the worshiper and his God and how to enter the presence of God. I know we can draw inferences, but the historical records were not about worship. Esther was not worshiping. Remember, the reason she got opportunity was because the queen refused to dance. Now, we're not told what dance she refused to dance, but I don't think it was ballet or waltz. I think the kings of that time were not looking for waltz. They were looking for more explicit dance. Now, we're not told that in the Bible, but you can conjecture. So Esther has to come in and replace the one who left. She doesn't do it by worshiping. I mean, you can say Esther was a worshiper. Believe you me, she wasn't worshiping. The competition was not a worship competition. The king is sitting on his seat. He's looking for a girl to marry, and she comes and says, I love you, Lord. That's not what she's looking for. He's looking for something more carnal than worship. And whatever it was, Esther produced it. Now we can spiritually dissect it and interpret it and honor it and glorify it and make it all holy. But believe you me, King Ahasuerus was not a holy man. Was God with Esther? Yes. What if Esther had not paid the price to be in the corridors of power? The Jews would all be killed. What did it cost her to get there? Listen to me. It's not always as simple as we wish it would be. But when Christians get into the corridors of power, they have to understand they are not there to promote their agenda. They are not there to seek their own welfare. They have to know they've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. There is a divine agenda. There is a divine purpose. So Daniel goes through 3 years of training and comes out. At this time, you know, he is a young graduate from the Babylonian system. So if you were Daniel, you would be maybe officer 1 in the hierarchy of the Babylonian system. Very basic, maybe first level officer status. If you were in the old civil service, there would be a deputy assistant something. How's he going to rise to the top? You are deputy assistant junior clerk. How are you going to go to the top? You're even a foreigner. So God works supernaturally. The king has a dream. And he comes to his wise men, the chief in the civil service, permanent secretaries, and all those guys. And he says, listen, guys, I had a dream the other night, and I need interpretation. So you guys tell me the interpretation. They say, yeah, I will tell you. Just tell us the dream, as you normally do. He says, no, you've been advising me for all this time. I don't even know whether you're giving me good advice or bad advice. So this time, I've raised the interrogation. So you have to tell me the dream, and tell me the interpretation. They say, sir, it never happens that way. We're not in your head. Tell us the dream. Everybody can interpret dream. You can make any story about a dream. He says, well, now tell me the dream and give me the interpretation. And if you don't, I kill you. You know, those guys they will just get rid of you. They don't, when they say you are fired, it wasn't a letter. So the king says, if you don't give me the interpretation, I'll start killing you. So they can't give the interpretation, he starts killing. So first level officers all cleared, second level cleared, third level cleared. Now it comes to Daniel's turn. Now, so everybody ahead of him is gone. So the executioner comes to Daniel and says, well, we came to see you today. It's at your level now. He says, what's at my level? He said, well, the king had a dream, and he says people should tell him what the dream is and the interpretation. And if you don't do it well, we'll just kill you. Daniel says, well, I came from Judah with a technology. It hasn't been used here before, because in Judah, we know how to access not just the solution, but we can dissect the problem and provide the solution. We can tell the dream and its interpretation. We can tell you what your problem is and tell you how to fix it. In Babylon, you only know how to fix problems, but in Judah, we know how to tell the problem. So let me consult my other associates, and we will bring you a business plan. Judah style. This we didn't learn from the Babylonian system, because there is a time when the Babylonian system cannot offer the answers, and the spirit within you will give you the answers. But you cannot use that until you've been through the Babylonian system to advance the system of Jehovah Yahweh God. So Daniel says, give me time. He consults his associates. They said, okay, tell the king, we'll meet him tomorrow, and we'll tell him the dream, and we'll give him the answers. By this time, all the obstruction in front of him, frontline officers eliminated. Just a fresh graduate from the University of Babylon, he goes to stand in front of the king. He says, oh, king, live forever. You know, they always say that, oh, king, live forever. You have to tell the king, live forever. It's part of the protocol of the kingdom. You have to, you go to the king and say, king, you're going to die. No, you say, oh, king, live forever. You know, there are people who say, well, as for me, I just say it like it is. I say it as I feel it. You can do that when you are at the top. You can say it like you feel, no, but because you pay everybody. But when you are paid, you don't say it like you feel it. You have to say, yes, sir, your majesty, your grace. May I have the permission, sir, to address you, sir? You have to say, sir, about 1,000 times, because you have no space. You have no space in the corridors of power. You know, the problem with a lot of young people trying to rise to the top, they imitate people at the top. The people at the top, they are the rulers. They set the game rules. You are now coming. You can't behave like them. You haven't graduated to be able to change the rules. You have to use the rules before you learn to change the rules. So Daniel comes in and says, O king, live forever. He says, well, I know that your other guys have failed, but where I came from, you thought you conquered our God, but there is a God in Judah. There is a God in heaven. He lives in me, and he has told me what your problem is. Okay, go ahead. And he told me, this is the dream you had. And if you listen to the dream, it's not a dream you can make up. I mean, there are dreams you can make up. You can say, well, you dreamed and you saw something like a dog, and it was like a dog and it looked like a cow, and it's something like a cow, but it's like a vulture somewhere, and Like some prophets would tell, it's like I see you, like you are being blessed, like the devil wants to take it away from you, like you'll be blessed, like it won't be blessed. What kind of prophecy is that? Anybody can make up that prophecy. I can give you about 10 probables, and like this and like that and like that, and somewhere in between. It's as if God is saying. If God is saying, he's saying. It's not as if he's saying it. So this is a dream that you can't make up. You can't make up this dream. Daniel says, you saw an image. The head was gold. The chest was silver. 2 arms folded. Then there is bronze. Then there is iron. And then there is feet of iron and clay. Believe you me, you can't make that up. This is not something you can conjecture. This has to be accurate. How did he get it? From the Babylonian system? No. He came from Judah with it. He came from Judah with it. He knew how to contact God. He knew to have superior knowledge. His people were at the bottom. His people were slaves, but they had superior information. They were slaves because their kings had messed them up. But those who knew their God, they were strong and they were doing exploits. And Daniel knew his God. And so in this small engineered space, he speaks to the king, tells him what a dream is, and then he goes for the interpretation. By the time he gets there, he has everybody's attention. He says, you king, you are the gold head. And after you, he didn't say you would die, but after you. After you would come another kingdom. Not as good as yours, but it will be there for a long time. And after you, another kingdom. And if you listen to the whole dream, he says, and after that, there would come another kingdom. And he says, I saw a stone that was hewn out of a mountain without hands. And that stone came and knocked off you and the one who came after you and the one who came after them and the one who came after everybody, and set up a new kingdom. And that kingdom was not handed over to another person. That's another message I can get into. But he interpreted it, he solved the problem, and listen to how he was addressed. In chapter 2 of Daniel, from verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel. This is serious, because the kings of that time, Nebuchadnezzar was almost a god, is a deity. He fell on his face, prostrate before God, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar is worshiping Daniel. He conquered Judah with an agenda to make the gods of Judah subject to him. But in 3 years, Daniel infiltrated his system and started changing the rules of his system. And now Nebuchadnezzar is bowing to Daniel. And the king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many gifts, many great gifts. And he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel also petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. A young slave boy of a conquered nation, whose God has been humiliated, whose faith has been ridiculed, enters a system that is totally against every value system he has, but pays the price to walk into that system with an agenda to make his God known in the corridors of power. And he ends up introducing this foreign god from Judah called Yahweh, worshipped by a small tribe of Israelites, but who is the God of heaven and earth, the maker of heaven and earth, the one great supreme God, to the Babylonian system. Now, did it change Nebuchadnezzar permanently? No, that's another message. But in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar decides, if after me is silver and I'm the gold, then I'm going to make an image all of gold. Nothing coming after me. I'm going head to toe gold. So he makes another system. And he says everybody bows to it. You know the story. The 3 friends of Daniel don't bow to it. God reveals, redeems, and Nebuchadnezzar makes another pledge. The thing about Nebuchadnezzar, he never repents fully. His heart will be moved, but because he's so consumed with power, he's always insecure about his throne. But the net effect is Daniel lived as the chief advisor from university. At this time, he was just in his early 20s. In the time of Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, Cyrus, 4 kings of Babylon and the Medo-Persians. Even when the Babylonians were conquered, he still was influential for 70 years, controlling nations and the policies of nations, because this young boy knew that in the corridors of power, you sometimes have to negotiate space for yourself. And he entered that space for God. That's where Esther went to. Esther operated in that same space. That's where Nehemiah operated, in that same space. People of a conquered race who managed to work their way into the corridors of power and change policy for the people of God. May God raise up amongst us sophisticated thinkers, sophisticated players on the world scene, not simple-minded, small-minded, naive thinkers, but people with a mind and a strategic foresight that sees beyond just the immediate inconvenience to establish the kingdom of God in the corridors of power, in science, in technology, in academia, in entertainment, in all the pillars of life. May God give us power, and may God make us influential. God bless you.